The celestial Nexus station rotated slowly against the backdrop of the Andromeda spiral, its metallic arms catching starlight like a mechanical flower. Inside its vast commercial district, tens of thousands of beings from across known space conducted their business beneath artificial skies that shifted from dawn to dusk in perfect 12-hour cycles. The air recyclers hummed constantly, filtering and adjusting the atmospheric mixture to accommodate oxygen breathers, methane processors, and the occasional crystalline entity that subsisted on radiation alone. Thomas Webb stood at his post near the central plaza, one hand resting casually on the neural stunner at his hip. At 6 feet tall, with shoulders broadened by years of manual labor before he'd taken this security job, he cut an unremarkable figure among the crowd. His uniform, standard issue grey with the Nexus security emblem on the chest, had seen better days. A coffee stain from 3 weeks ago still marked the left sleeve, and the right knee bore a patch where he'd torn it chasing down a Vexorian pickpocket. Most species that passed him didn't spare a second glance. Humans were common enough on the station, though rarely in positions of authority. The Galactic Council's membership requirements meant that Earth's representative held only observer status, and by extension, human employees throughout Council space were considered adequate, useful for menial tasks, nothing more. Thomas had made peace with that assessment 5 years ago when he'd first signed on. The pay was decent, the work straightforward, and nobody expected brilliance from him. Show up, walk the routes, break up the occasional drunken altercation between incompatible species, file the reports. Simple. The crowd surged around him in its usual chaotic rhythm, a family of Quilori, tall, crystalline beings that chimed softly with each movement, drifted past, their translated conversation discussing the price of antimatter fuel. A pair of Kravik merchants, their 6 arms gesturing wildly, argued over shipping rates while their translator devices struggled to keep pace. Somewhere in the distance, a street performer was doing something that produced periodic bursts of bioluminescence and appreciative clicking sounds from onlookers. Thomas's comm unit crackled. "Webb, you copy." He tapped the device at his collar. "Copy, Sergeant Vrel. Got a situation developing in Sector 7 Gamma. Couple of Tharn enforcers hassling vendors. Need you to swing by. Make sure it doesn't escalate." "On my way." Thomas pushed off from his post and began threading through the crowd. The Tharn were members of a warrior culture that prized strength above all else. Most of them were decent enough, but their enforcers, essentially licensed bounty hunters, had a tendency to interpret pursuing a target as destroying everything between here and there. Station management tolerated them because Tharn credits spent as well as anyone else's, but security personnel like Thomas were expected to keep property damage to a minimum. Sector 7 Gamma occupied the station's lower commercial ring, where the lighting ran dimmer, and the air recyclers worked harder to mask the smell of a dozen different cuisines being prepared in close quarters. Thomas descended via the public lift, sharing the cramped space with a Dolmari trader whose tentacles kept brushing against his legs despite his efforts to avoid contact. The doors opened to reveal a marketplace in full swing. Stalls selling everything from protein slabs to personal shield generators lined both sides of the corridor. Holographic advertisements flickered overhead in languages Thomas couldn't read, promoting goods he couldn't identify. He'd learned early in his career not to ask too many questions about inventory. He spotted the Tharn immediately. 2 of them, both wearing the distinctive crimson armor that marked them as sanctioned enforcers. They stood before a small stall run by a Quilori vendor, their postures aggressive. The vendor's crystalline form had taken on a darker hue. Fear, Thomas had learned, manifested in their species as color shifts. Thomas approached with his hands visible and empty. "Gentlemen, can I help you with something?" The nearest Tharn turned to face him. Like all his species, he stood nearly 8 feet tall, with 4 arms ending in clawed hands and a face that resembled a cross between a lizard and a shark. His translator unit produced a voice like grinding stone. "Human, this does not concern you. We are conducting official business. On this station, everything concerns security." Thomas kept his tone conversational. "What's the nature of your business?" "A criminal we pursue purchased goods from this merchant," We require access to transaction records. Thomas glanced at the Quilori, whose chiming voice came through his translator as nervous tones. I have explained. I cannot release customer data without proper authorization from station management. Privacy protocols. Your protocols mean nothing. The second Tharn slammed one of his fists onto the stall's counter, leaving a dent in the metal. Produce the records or face obstruction charges. Thomas sighed internally. This was going to be one of those days. Sir, if you damage station property, I'm required to detain you for processing. Let's all take a breath and... Movement caught his eye. Something small darted between the Tharn enforcer's legs, moving with remarkable speed. Thomas's trained gaze tracked it automatically, a survival instinct developed from breaking up hundreds of these situations. Whatever it was tiny, barely reaching his knee height, and it was running directly toward him. The small figure collided with his legs and grabbed hold of his right calf, trembling. Thomas looked down and felt his breath catch. It was a child, or at least he assumed it was a child. The being couldn't have been more than 3 feet tall, with enormous eyes that took up nearly half its face. Its skin was a soft lavender color, covered in fine scales that shimmered under the market's lights. 4 delicate fingers on each hand gripped his pant leg with desperate strength. The creature wore what looked like a simple tunic, torn at one shoulder and stained with something dark. Please, it whispered, the translator rendering its voice as a frightened child's. Please help me. The Tharn enforcer who'd been speaking stepped forward, his 4 arms spreading wide. That is our quarry. Hand it over, human. Thomas looked between the terrified child clinging to his leg and the massive warrior in front of him. Every regulation in the security manual said he should comply with sanctioned enforcers pursuing a criminal. Every practical instinct said that getting between a Tharn and their target was a good way to end up in medical bay, or worse. He felt the child's trembling intensify. Those huge eyes stared up at him with an expression that transcended species, pure terror. No, Thomas said quietly. The marketplace seemed to hold its breath. Conversations died mid-sentence. Vendors froze in the act of displaying their wares. Even the holographic advertisements flickered and steadied, as if the station itself was paying attention. The Tharn enforcer's eyes narrowed. You refuse? I'm asking you to provide proper documentation of your warrant. If this individual is actually a wanted criminal, you'll have the paperwork. Show me that, and we can process this through appropriate channels. Thomas's hand didn't move toward his weapon, but he shifted his weight slightly, putting himself more fully between the child and the enforcers. The second Tharn laughed, a sound like rocks tumbling down a mountain. It is a Pixori spawn. They are vermin. No warrant is required. Pixori. Thomas searched his memory. The name rang a distant bell, one of the countless minor species scattered throughout the galaxy, too small and weak to matter in council politics. He'd never met one before. On this station, everyone receives due process, Thomas said. Council Regulation 774B. I'm sure you're familiar with it. The first enforcer's claws extended with a soft click. Step aside, human. Your species may have delusions of equality, but you have no authority to impede us. Actually, station security regulations supersede external enforcement protocols within commercial sectors. That's in your contract with management. Thomas kept his voice level, professional. You're welcome to file a complaint with my supervisor, but right now, you need to either produce proper documentation or leave this individual in my custody until the matter is resolved. For a long moment, nothing moved except the child's trembling against his leg. The Tharn enforcers stared at him with expressions that might have been disbelief, might have been rage. Thomas couldn't read their species well enough to be sure. Then the first enforcer moved. He was fast, faster than something that large had any right to be. One of his forearms shot out, claws extended, reaching past Thomas for the child. Thomas reacted on instinct, his hand snapping up to catch the Tharn's wrist. The impact sent shockwaves up his arm, but he held firm, redirecting the grab away from its target. Don't, Thomas said, his voice dropping to something harder. The enforcer's other 3 arms tensed. His partner shifted position, flanking. Thomas was acutely aware that he was outmatched in every physical category: strength, speed, reach, natural weapons. His neural stunner might drop one of them, but not both, and not before they tore him apart. The child whimpered, pressing closer against his leg. Thomas met the Tharn's gaze and didn't blink. The standoff stretched for 3 heartbeats. 4. 5. Thomas felt sweat beginning to form at his collar, despite the station's climate control. His hand remained locked around the Tharn enforcer's wrist, feeling the tremendous strength coiled in those alien muscles, strength that could snap his arm like a twig if the warrior chose to exert it. Around them, the marketplace had gone completely silent. Thomas could see other beings backing away, creating a clear space around the confrontation. Smart. If this went violent, bystanders would only get hurt. The second Tharn circled slowly to Thomas's left, evaluating. His forearms hung loose and ready, claws catching the light. "Brave," he said, the translator giving his words an almost mocking tone. "Foolish, but brave. Tell me, human, do you know what happens to those who stand between a Tharn hunter and his prey?" "I know what happens to people who assault station security personnel," Thomas replied evenly. He still hadn't released the first enforcer's wrist, though his fingers were starting to ache from the pressure required to maintain his grip. "Immediate detention and prosecution under council law. Your employers might reconsider your contracts." The first enforcer's lips pulled back, revealing rows of serrated teeth. "You would fight, you, alone, against both of us." "I would do my job." Thomas kept his breathing steady, controlled. "Which includes protecting station residents from unlawful violence. Your move, gentlemen." For a moment, he thought they might actually attack. The muscles in the enforcer's wrist tensed beneath his grip. The second Tharn's stance shifted into something that looked disturbingly combat-ready. Thomas's free hand drifted toward his neural stunner, knowing it wouldn't be enough, but determined to make them work for it. Then a new voice cut through the tension, sharp and crystalline. "Security incident. Multiple witnesses recording. Enforcement guild contractors engaging station personnel without provocation. Recommend immediate stand-down to avoid contract violation penalties." The Quilori vendor had activated some kind of recording device, and apparently wasn't the only one. Thomas caught the glimmer of at least 3 other recording units among the watching crowd, all focused on the confrontation. The Galactic Enforcement Guild took its reputation seriously. Contractors who violated protocols and got caught doing it found themselves unemployed very quickly. The first Tharn's expression shifted from aggressive to calculating. His eyes, 3 of them, Thomas noted with the detached part of his mind that catalogued such details, flicked toward the recording devices, then back to Thomas. Slowly, deliberately, he withdrew his arm from Thomas's grip. "This is not concluded," he growled. "The Pixori will answer for its crimes." "Then file the proper paperwork, and we'll schedule a hearing," Thomas said. "Until then, the individual is under station protection." The 2 enforcers stared at him for another long moment, then turned in perfect synchronization and stalked away. The crowd parted before them like water before a ship's prow. Thomas watched until they disappeared around the corridor's curve before he allowed himself to release the breath he'd been holding. The marketplace slowly returned to life. Conversations resumed. Vendors called out their wares. The normal chaos of commerce re-established itself. Thomas became aware that his hand was shaking slightly. Adrenaline aftermath. He'd been in dangerous situations before, but something about staring down 2 Tharn enforcers had hit different. Small hands tugged at his pant leg. Thomas looked down at the Pixori child still clinging to him. Now that the immediate threat had passed, he could see the creature more clearly. Definitely young. Something about the proportions, the size of those eyes relative to the face, the slightly unsteady way it held itself. The stain on its tunic was blood, he realized. Not much, but enough to suggest injury. "Are you hurt?" Thomas knelt down, bringing himself to the child's eye level. Up close, those enormous eyes were a shifting violet color, with pupils that seemed to reflect more light than they should. The child shook its head, then nodded, then shook its head again. "It's translator unit," a cheap model clipped to its collar, struggled with the gesture. My wing. They hurt my wing. Wings. Thomas looked more carefully and spotted them. Delicate, translucent structures folded against the child's back, almost invisible when not extended. One of them hung at an odd angle, and the membrane showed a tear that leaked pale fluid. Okay, Thomas said gently. We're going to get you to medical. Can you walk? I think so. Good. Thomas straightened and tapped his comm unit. Dispatch, this is Webb. I need a medical team to Sector 7 Gamma, Marketplace District. Injured juvenile, possible wing fracture. Also, log an incident report. 2 Enforcement Guild contractors, Tharn species, attempted unlawful detention. I'll file the full report within the hour. The dispatcher's voice came back confused. Webb, confirm. You engaged with Guild contractors? Affirmative. They withdrew without incident, but I want it documented. Copy that. Medical team dispatched. Command wants to see you when you're clear. Understood. Webb out. Thomas looked around and spotted the Quilori vendor who'd activated the recording device. He approached the stall, the Pixori child trailing behind him like a shadow. Thank you for that. Quick thinking. The vendor's crystalline form chimed softly. Those Tharn have been causing problems for 3 cycles. Somebody needed to stand up to them. The being paused, then added, though I admit, I did not expect that somebody to be human. Your species is not known for confrontational behavior. Thomas smiled without humor. We have our moments. Did you catch what this was about? What did they think the kid did? The child purchased protein rations from my stall approximately 1 hour ago, paid in legitimate credits. When those enforcers arrived, they claimed the Pixori had stolen valuable property from their employer. They demanded my transaction records to trace the child's movements. The vendor's color shifted to something that suggested indignation. I have operated this stall for 17 years. I will not betray customer privacy for bounty hunters. The credits, were they legitimate? My scanner verified them. Standard council currency, properly registered. Thomas filed that information away. If the child had money for food, it suggested a level of independence, or at least recent access to resources. The torn clothing and injured wing painted a different picture. Something didn't add up. The medical team arrived within minutes, a Dolmari physician and her human assistant rolling a portable stretcher unit. The physician's tentacles worked with practiced efficiency, scanning the Pixori child with handheld instruments, while her assistant took notes on a data pad. Minor fracture to the left wing structure, the physician announced in a voice like bubbling water. Membrane tear, approximately 4 centimeters. Standard regeneration treatment should resolve both issues within 3 days. The child is also malnourished and shows signs of prolonged stress. She fixed Thomas with several of her eye stalks. How did this injury occur? Unknown. The child was fleeing from Enforcement Guild contractors when I intervened. Thomas watched as they loaded the Pixori onto the stretcher. Those huge eyes stared at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Gratitude? Fear? Trust? I will need to report this to Station Child Services, the physician said. Unaccompanied juveniles require proper documentation and guardianship arrangements. Of course, I'll coordinate with them for my incident report. Thomas paused, then asked the question that had been bothering him. Doctor, what can you tell me about the Pixori? I'm not familiar with the species. The Dolmari's tentacles performed a gesture that might have been a shrug. Minor species from the Outer Rim territories. Populations scattered across several systems. No unified government or council representation. They're known primarily for their size and their wings, natural flyers in low-gravity environments, also known for having exceptional memories and spatial awareness. She glanced at the child on the stretcher. Though this one seems young even by their standards, perhaps 4 or 5 standard years. 4 or 5 years old and running from bounty hunters. Thomas felt something cold settle in his stomach. Take care of the kid. I'll be by medical later to check in. As you wish, security guard Webb. They departed with the child, leaving Thomas alone with his thoughts and a marketplace full of witnesses who kept shooting him curious glances. He'd been on the celestial nexus long enough to know that gossip traveled faster than light-speed communications, and what he'd just done, standing up to Tharn enforcers, physically restraining one of them, would be all over the station by nightfall. His comm unit crackled. "Webb, this is Commander Yattrell. My office. Now." Thomas winced. Here it came. Commander Yattrell's office occupied a prime location on the station's administrative level, with viewports that offered a sweeping perspective of the docking arms and the star field beyond. Yattrell himself, a Kravik with silver-streaked carapace that denoted his advanced age, sat behind a desk made of some dark wood imported from Earth at considerable expense. He'd always appreciated the irony, he'd once told Thomas, of using human craftsmanship while managing a largely non-human security force. Thomas stood at attention in front of the desk, hands clasped behind his back, waiting. Yattrell had been reviewing something on his datapad for the past 90 seconds, without looking up or speaking. It was a power play, one that Thomas had experienced often enough to recognize, but not often enough to become immune to its intended effect. Finally, Yattrell set down the datapad and fixed Thomas with 2 of his 6 eyes, the others continuing to scan various displays around the office. "Explain to me," he said slowly, "why I have the Enforcement Guild's regional supervisor on my priority channel demanding your immediate termination and deportation. I prevented 2 of their contractors from assaulting a minor without proper legal documentation, sir. They claim you physically attacked one of their enforcers. I restrained his arm when he attempted to grab the child in my protective custody. Minimal force, appropriate to the situation." Yattrell's mandibles clicked together, the Kravik equivalent of a sigh. "Webb, do you have any idea what Tharn enforcers are capable of? You're lucky they didn't tear you apart." "I'm aware of their capabilities, sir. I'm also aware of station regulations regarding the treatment of minors and the limits of external enforcement authority within our jurisdiction." "Regulations." Yattrell leaned back in his chair, which adjusted automatically to accommodate his multi-limbed frame. "You've been with station security for 5 years. In that time, you've compiled a record that can best be described as adequate. You follow procedures, you file your reports on time, you don't cause trouble. Why, suddenly, decide to pick a fight with 2 of the most dangerous contractors on this station?" Thomas considered his answer carefully. "The child was terrified, sir. The enforcers were operating without proper documentation. I made a judgment call. A judgment call that could have gotten you killed and resulted in a major diplomatic incident." Yattrell picked up the datapad again, scrolling through what Thomas assumed was the incident report. "Multiple witnesses state that you held your ground against both enforcers despite being vastly outmatched. One vendor described your actions as either remarkably brave or catastrophically stupid. I'm inclined to agree with the second assessment. With respect, sir, what would you have had me do? Hand over an injured child to armed individuals who couldn't produce a warrant or even articulate specific charges?" "Yes," Yattrell said flatly. "That's exactly what you should have done. Let the Guild handle their business. File a protest through proper channels if you felt the situation warranted it, and avoid creating a situation where this station potentially goes to war with one of our largest security contractors." Thomas felt his jaw tighten, but kept his voice level. "Is that an official reprimand, sir?" Yattrell stared at him for a long moment, all 6 eyes now focused directly on Thomas. "The Enforcement Guild supervisor demands your termination. The Quilori Merchant Association is circulating a petition praising your actions and requesting commendation. Station Child Services has filed a report thanking security for protecting a vulnerable juvenile. And I have at least 40 different species sending me messages about the brave human security guard who stood up to Tharn warriors." "Sir, I'm not finished." Yattrell set down the datapad again, this time with enough force to make the desk vibrate. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to write a detailed incident report covering every second of that encounter. You're going to coordinate with Child Services regarding the Pixori juvenile. And you're going to stay away from those Tharn enforcers unless absolutely necessary for your duties." "Understood, sir." I'm also assigning you temporary liaison duty with the Pixori delegation. Thomas blinked. Sir, what Pixori delegation? The one that arrived on the station approximately 2 hours ago, right around the time you were playing hero in the marketplace. Yatrell pulled up a new file on his datapad and transferred it to the office's main display. An image appeared, a sleek ship of unfamiliar design, docked at one of the station's auxiliary ports. 47 Pixori, led by someone called the Wing Marshal. They're requesting an immediate audience with Station Command regarding a stolen child of significant importance. The pieces clicked together in Thomas's mind. The kid I helped. Probably. Yatrell's mandibles clicked again. So you can explain to these Pixori exactly what happened, and why one of my security guards thought it was appropriate to physically restrain an enforcement guild contractor. Maybe they'll be grateful enough not to join the guild in demanding your head. When do they want to meet? They're in conference room 7 right now, waiting for you. Yatrell fixed him with what might have been concern. It was hard to tell with Kravik. Webb, I've seen a lot of security guards come through this station. Most of them learn quickly that keeping your head down and following procedures is the only way to survive in a galaxy that doesn't particularly care about human opinions. You've always seemed to understand that. So I have to ask, why risk everything for one small alien you'd never met before? Thomas thought about those enormous violet eyes staring up at him in terror, about small hands gripping his leg with desperate strength, about a voice that barely qualified as a whisper saying, "Please help me." Because it was the right thing to do, sir. Yatrell was quiet for a long moment. Then he made a gesture with 2 of his arms that Thomas had learned meant dismissal. Conference room 7. Don't keep them waiting. And Webb? Try not to start any more interspecies incidents today. I'd like to finish my shift without fielding death threats against my personnel. I'll do my best, sir. Thomas left the office and made his way through the administrative corridors toward the conference wing. His mind raced, trying to anticipate what he might be walking into. A delegation of 47 Pixori, led by someone with a military-sounding title, looking for a child that Tharn bounty hunters had been chasing. None of it added up to anything good. Conference room 7 was one of the smaller meeting spaces, designed to accommodate up to 20 beings of average size. When Thomas triggered the door controls and stepped inside, he discovered that average size was a relative term. The room was packed with Pixori. They perched on every available surface: chairs, tables, the edges of the holographic display unit, even the windowsills. All of them were small, none taller than Thomas's waist, with the same enormous eyes and delicate wings he'd seen on the child. But where the child had seemed fragile and frightened, these Pixori radiated intensity. Their wings, displayed in a riot of colors from deep crimson to electric blue, flexed and shifted with barely contained energy. At the head of the conference table stood the largest Pixori Thomas had seen. Though large was still relative, she maybe reached his chest. Her wings were a deep gold color, traced with silver patterns that caught the light. She wore armor of some kind, lightweight but clearly functional, and a sidearm that Thomas didn't recognize was holstered at her hip. When she turned to face him, her violet eyes were sharp and assessing. "You are security guard Thomas Webb." It wasn't a question. Her voice, even through the translator, carried absolute authority. "I am. And you're the Wing Marshal?" "Wing Marshal Kessa of the 3rd Aerial Legion." She stepped forward, and Thomas noticed that the other Pixori in the room had all gone completely still, watching. "You encountered our Sky Daughter approximately 3 hours ago in the Marketplace district." "If you mean the child I took into protective custody, yes. She's currently in medical receiving treatment for a wing injury." A ripple passed through the assembled Pixori, wings flexing, subtle shifts in posture. Kessa's expression remained neutral, but something flashed in those violet eyes. "Treatment. You provided medical care." "Station protocol for injured minors. The doctor said it's a minor fracture and membrane tear. Should heal completely with standard regeneration therapy." "And the Tharn who pursued her?" Thomas met her gaze steadily. "I prevented them from taking her into custody. They couldn't produce proper documentation of their warrant, and I wasn't about to hand over an injured child to armed individuals who couldn't articulate specific charges against her. Another ripple through the room, stronger this time. Several Pixori exchanged glances. Kessa took another step forward, closing the distance between them until she had to crane her neck to maintain eye contact. Those Tharn are experienced hunters, dangerous, skilled in combat. Her voice dropped slightly. Yet you stood against them, alone. It's my job to protect station residents. Your job. Kessa's wings flared slightly, the first break in her controlled demeanor. Human, do you understand who you protected? Who you risked your life for? An injured child who was afraid. That's all I needed to know. The room exploded into motion. Every Pixori in the conference room launched into the air simultaneously, their wings creating a sudden rush of wind that sent Thomas's hair flying back. They hovered in a perfect formation around him, creating what looked like an honor guard of tiny flying warriors. Their wings hummed with a frequency Thomas could feel in his chest, and their eyes, dozens of them, all fixed on him with an intensity that made him want to step back. He held his ground, more out of stubborn pride than actual courage. Wing Marshal Kessa remained on the ground, but her wings had spread to their full extension, revealing patterns that seemed to glow with internal light. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight that transcended the translator's flat rendering. 3 days ago, our Sky Daughter was taken from her personal chambers on our homeworld. The perpetrators were Tharn mercenaries working for an unknown employer. They breached our most secure installations, killed 14 of our finest warriors, and escaped with the most precious individual in our entire civilization. She paused, and Thomas saw something raw in her expression. Grief, fury, shame all mixed together. We have been hunting them across 3 systems. We traced them here. When we arrived, we learned that a human security guard had stood between our Sky Daughter and her captors, that you physically restrained a Tharn enforcer to protect her. Thomas processed this information, his mind racing. The kid, she's royalty? Some kind of political figure? She is more than that. Kessa made a gesture, and one of the hovering Pixori descended, carrying a small device. She activated it, projecting a holographic image into the air between them. It showed a gathering of thousands of Pixori, all hovering in concentric circles around a central platform. On that platform stood the child Thomas had protected, her wings spread wide, surrounded by what looked like crackling energy. She is our Skyborn, the first in 3 generations, the embodiment of our people's connection to flight, to freedom, to the very essence of what makes us Pixori. The hologram shifted, showing the child performing what looked like an intricate aerial dance, her movements creating patterns of light in the air. Other Pixori joined her, their formations weaving around her central presence like planets orbiting a star. Among our people, Kessa continued, the Skyborn is sacred, not a ruler in the way other species understand governance, but something deeper. She carries within her the collected memories of every Skyborn who came before. She can hear the thoughts of any Pixori who shares the sky with her. She is our past, our present, and our future made manifest. Thomas stared at the hologram, then looked at Kessa. You're telling me the kid I grabbed off the marketplace floor is basically your species' living god? We do not worship her. We protect her. We die for her. Kessa's wings folded slightly, a gesture that might have been shame. Except we failed. The Tharn who took her knew exactly when our defensive rotations changed. They had access codes to sealed chambers. Someone within our own ranks betrayed us, and we still don't know who. When they escaped with her, they thought they could ransom her, demand territory, resources, council representation for whoever hired them. But she escaped. She did. Pride entered Kessa's voice. Despite her age, despite her injuries, our Skyborn fought her way free of their ship when they docked here for refueling. She made it into the station, but they pursued. If they'd recaptured her... She didn't finish the sentence. Thomas thought about the terrified child clinging to his leg, about those enormous eyes looking up at him with desperate hope. She's just a kid. Maybe she's special to your people, but she's still a child who was hurt and scared. Yes. Kessa stepped even closer, and Thomas realized that the other Pixori had descended slightly, tightening their formation. And you saw only a child who needed protection, not a political asset, not a strategic prize, just a small being in danger. You stood against warriors who could have killed you. You risked your career, possibly your life, for someone you'd never met and had no obligation to protect beyond basic decency. It's what anyone should have done. But they didn't. Kessa's voice hardened. Dozens of beings in that marketplace saw our Skyborn fleeing. They saw the Tharn pursuing her. Not one of them intervened. Not one of them risked themselves to help a child of a species they didn't know and had no reason to care about. They watched. They recorded. They did nothing. Thomas had no response to that. He'd seen the crowd's reaction, the way they'd backed away from the confrontation. In his 5 years on the station, he'd witnessed that same calculation hundreds of times. People deciding that someone else's problem wasn't worth their involvement. You did what our own warriors could not, Kessa said quietly. You were there when we failed. You stood when others fled. You protected our most precious treasure without even knowing what you were protecting. One of the hovering Pixori descended and landed on the conference table. He was older than Kessa, Thomas noted, with wings of deep purple marked by white scars. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of years. I am Fleet Commander Torvin. I have served in our Legion for 43 years. I have fought in 17 major engagements and countless minor ones. I have seen warriors of 100 species display courage under fire. He fixed Thomas with an unblinking stare. What you did in that marketplace, standing your ground against superior force to protect an innocent, that is the highest form of valor our people recognize. We call it wing truth, the moment when what you are is proven by what you do, regardless of cost. I just did my job, Thomas protested, feeling increasingly uncomfortable with the direction this was heading. Your job is to maintain order on a commercial station, Kessa corrected. What you did transcended duty. You saw a child in danger, and you chose to become the barrier between that child and harm. Not because you had to. Not because anyone would have blamed you for stepping aside, but because stepping aside was unthinkable to you. She made a gesture, and all the hovering Pixori descended in perfect unison, landing on various surfaces around the room. Their wings folded against their backs, but their eyes remained fixed on Thomas. Kessa herself lowered herself to one knee, her wings spreading slightly in a posture that Thomas's instincts recognized as one of deep respect. Thomas Webb, she said formally, on behalf of the 3rd Aerial Legion and the entire Pixori Assembly, I offer you our eternal gratitude. You saved our Skyborn when we could not. You protected her when others would not. You stood when standing meant facing your own probable death. There is no reward we could offer that would equal such a debt. I don't want a reward. I just want to know the kid's okay. Kessa smiled, the first genuine warmth Thomas had seen from her. She is recovering well. The doctors say she will heal completely. She has asked to see you, actually. She says... Kessa paused, and Thomas could have sworn he saw moisture in her eyes. She says she knew you would protect her because you had kind eyes. A child's wisdom, but perhaps the truest kind. Thomas felt something tight in his chest loosen slightly. I'd like to see her too. Make sure she's really all right. Of course. Kessa rose to her feet, her wings folding precisely against her back. But there is another matter we must discuss. The Tharn who hunted our Skyborn. They will not stop. Whoever hired them has invested too much in this operation to simply abandon it. They will try again. Then we need to find out who's behind this, and we need to get the kid somewhere safe. We are taking her home. Our fleet is positioning for departure within the next 6 hours. But... Kessa hesitated, sharing a glance with Fleet Commander Torvin. We have a request, one that you are free to refuse without any diminishment of our gratitude. Thomas had a sinking feeling he knew where this was going. What kind of request? Come with us. Not permanently. We would not ask you to abandon your life, but travel with us to our homeworld. Stand witness as we investigate this betrayal and root out those responsible. Our Skyborn trusts you, and trust is precious when treachery has wounded us so deeply. I'm a security guard on a commercial station. I don't know anything about investigating political conspiracies or dealing with interstellar intrigue. You know how to stand your ground when it matters, Torvin said. You know how to see past species and status to the being underneath, and you have proven that you will protect our Skyborn regardless of personal cost. These qualities are more valuable than any amount of political sophistication. Thomas thought about Commander Yatrell's office, about his small apartment in the station's residential ring, about the routine patrols and incident reports that made up his daily existence. 5 years of adequate service. 5 years of following procedures and not making waves. 5 years of being precisely what everyone expected from a human in galactic space. Competent enough to be useful, unimportant enough to ignore. Then he thought about a small child with violet eyes saying, "Please help me." How long would this take? 2 weeks, perhaps 3. We would ensure your employer receives proper compensation for your absence. And you'd bring me back. On my honor as Wing Marshal, Kessa said firmly. You would be our guest, free to depart whenever you wish. Thomas knew he should refuse. This was way beyond his job description, beyond his expertise, beyond anything he had training or experience to handle. The smart move would be to wish them well, go back to his normal duties, and file this entire incident under strange things that happen on space stations. But he kept seeing those enormous eyes staring up at him, kept feeling those small hands gripping his leg with desperate strength, kept hearing that whispered, "Please." "Okay," he heard himself say. "I'll come, but I need to clear it with my commander first." Kessa's wings flared wide, and suddenly the entire room erupted in sound. It took Thomas a moment to realize that the Pixori were singing, their voices creating harmonies that seemed to resonate in the air itself, building into something that made his skin prickle with its intensity. Their wings joined the chorus, humming at frequencies that blended with their voices into music unlike anything he'd ever heard. When the song ended, Kessa stepped forward and placed one small hand on Thomas's chest, directly over his heart. "You honor us, Thomas Webb, more than you know." "I haven't done anything yet," he protested. "You did everything that mattered," she replied. "The rest is merely details." Commander Yatrell stared at Thomas across his desk with an expression that transcended simple disbelief and entered the territory of existential confusion. All 6 of his eyes were focused directly on Thomas, unblinking, and his mandibles had frozen mid-click. "Let me make certain I understand correctly," he said slowly. "The Pixori delegation wants to take you to their homeworld, to investigate a conspiracy involving the kidnapping of their, what did you call her? Skyborn?" "That's correct, sir." "And you said yes." "Pending your approval, sir." Yatrell leaned back in his chair, which creaked under his weight. "Webb, 3 hours ago I had you in this office telling you to avoid interspecies incidents. Now you're volunteering to fly halfway across the sector with a species we barely have diplomatic relations with to investigate political intrigue that could involve multiple hostile parties. I understand it's irregular, sir." "Irregular?" Yatrell made a sound that might have been laughter or choking. "Webb, in my 30 years managing station security, I have never had a guard request leave to become involved in what amounts to an interstellar conspiracy investigation. I'm not even sure what forms I would need to file." Thomas stood at attention, waiting. He'd learned that when Yatrell started talking about forms and procedures, he was actually thinking through the real issue beneath the bureaucracy. "Tell me honestly," Yatrell said after a long moment. "Why do you want to do this? Is it guilt? Some misplaced sense of responsibility for a child you barely know?" "The kid trusts me. After everything she's been through, being kidnapped, injured, hunted across systems, she trusts me. The Pixori think having someone she trusts nearby will help her feel safe while they deal with their internal problems." "That doesn't answer my question. Why do you care?" Thomas thought about that. "When I took this job 5 years ago, I thought it would be simple. Follow the rules, keep the peace, collect my paycheck. And mostly, it has been. But today, when that child grabbed my leg and looked up at me with those eyes, she didn't see a human or a low-level security guard or anything else. She just saw someone who might help her, someone who might be safe. And I realized that's the only job that actually matters, being the person who helps when help is needed. Yattrell was quiet for a long moment. You know this could be dangerous. Political conspiracies tend to involve people willing to kill to protect their interests. The Tharn mercenaries who kidnapped the Skyborn murdered 14 warriors to get to her. Whoever hired them has resources and connections. I know, sir. You also know that if something happens to you out there, there's very little this station can do to help. We have no jurisdiction in Pixori space, no treaties that would allow us to intervene in their internal matters. I understand. And you still want to do this? Yes, sir. Yattrell sighed, a whistling sound through his respiratory slits. The Pixori have offered to compensate the station for your absence. Generously, I might add. Apparently they're not as economically insignificant as the council assessments suggest. They've also offered to provide testimony regarding your actions today that would formally commend you for exceptional conduct in the line of duty. Thomas blinked. He hadn't expected that. Sir? Wing Marshal Kessler spent 20 minutes in my office explaining exactly what their Skyborn means to their civilization and exactly what you risked by standing between her and those Tharn. She made it very clear that they consider your actions to be worthy of the highest honors they can bestow. Yattrell pulled up a file on his datapad. She also mentioned that she's recommending you be granted status as an honorary member of the 3rd Aerial Legion. I had to look that up. It's apparently something they've only done 17 times in their entire recorded history. I don't understand. I just stopped some bounty hunters from grabbing a kid. You just proved to a species that's been consistently overlooked and underestimated by the galactic community that individual courage and moral conviction still matter more than size or strength or political power. Yattrell set down the datapad. Webb, do you know what most species think when they see a human working security on a station like this? They think adequate, competent enough to fill a role, but not particularly noteworthy. We're the background characters in everyone else's story. Useful, forgettable, easily replaced. Sir, I'm not sure where you're going with this. I'm saying that what you did today changed that equation. You made those Tharn enforcers back down. You protected someone who needed protecting without calculating the cost. You made multiple species stop and think, maybe humans are more than we assumed. That has value, Webb. Not just for you, but for every human trying to make a place in this galaxy. Thomas felt heat rising in his face. I really didn't think about it like that. I just saw a kid who needed help. I know. That's what makes it powerful. Yattrell stood, moving around his desk to stand directly in front of Thomas. Your leave request is approved. 2 weeks, with an option to extend to 3 if necessary. The Pixori compensation will more than cover temporary replacement personnel. You'll be listed as on special assignment, which should prevent any awkward questions from other departments. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet. When you get back, you're going to have to sit through about 40 hours of debrief sessions with various departments who'll want to know everything about Pixori culture, technology, political structures, and whatever else you observe. Interspecies Relations Office is already salivating at the prospect of first-hand intelligence on a species we've had minimal contact with. Understood, sir. Yattrell extended one of his arms for a handshake, a gesture he'd learned from working with humans. Thomas took it, feeling the cool, hard texture of the Kravik's carapace against his palm. Stay safe out there, Webb. And for what it's worth, I'm proud of you. You did good work today. Thomas left the commander's office feeling slightly dazed. The past few hours had taken on a surreal quality, as if he'd slipped sideways into someone else's life. When he'd woken up this morning, his biggest concern had been whether the coffee dispenser in the security break room would be working. Now he was preparing to travel to an alien homeworld he'd never heard of 24 hours ago. His comm unit buzzed. Webb, this is medical. Your Pixori patient is awake and requesting to see you. Thomas changed direction, heading for the medical wing. The station's corridors were busy with the evening shift change, thousands of beings moving with the practiced efficiency of people who'd navigated these spaces countless times. A few of them glanced at him as he passed, and Thomas wondered if word of the marketplace incident had spread as far as he suspected. The medical wing maintained atmosphere and lighting that could be adjusted for patient comfort, which meant walking through a series of transitional zones as environmental controls shifted between sections. Thomas found the Pixori child in a private recovery room where the gravity had been reduced to Earth normal. The doctors had apparently calibrated it for Thomas's visits rather than the child's needs. She was perched on the edge of her medical bed, her injured wing carefully bandaged with some kind of translucent wrap that allowed the membrane to breathe while holding the fracture stable. When Thomas entered, those enormous violet eyes lit up with recognition. "You came," she said, her voice stronger now than it had been in the marketplace. "I said I would check on you. How are you feeling?" "Better. The doctor said my wing will heal, that I'll be able to fly again." She paused, then added softly, "I was afraid they'd broken it too badly, that I'd be grounded forever." Thomas pulled up a chair and sat down, bringing himself closer to her eye level. "The doctor is very good. She said everything would heal completely. Kessa came to see me too. She told me what you did, how you stood against the Tharn who were chasing me." The child tilted her head, studying him with disconcerting intensity. "Why did you do that? You didn't know me. You didn't know what I was. You were scared and hurt. That's all I needed to know. But they were Tharn. They could have killed you. Maybe. Probably. But letting them take you seemed worse." The child was quiet for a moment, her wings, even the injured one, shifting slightly. "My name is Lissa. Wing Marshal Kessa says names are important, that knowing someone's name means you acknowledge them as real." "Hello, Lissa. I'm Thomas. I know. Everyone's talking about you, about the human who stood against Tharn warriors to protect the Skyborn." Lissa's expression turned troubled. "They're making you into a story, a hero. But you don't feel like a story. You feel real." Thomas smiled. "I am real. Heroes are just regular people who happen to be in the right place at the right time. Kessa says you're coming home with us, to our world. If that's okay with you." "Yes." Lisa's response was immediate and emphatic. "I want you to come. Everything else feels uncertain. The betrayal, the investigation, going home to people who let me be taken. But you feel certain. Like gravity. You won't let me fall." The trust in those words hit Thomas harder than the physical confrontation with the Tharn had. This child, this impossibly important sacred being that an entire civilization centered themselves around, trusted him, believed in him, saw him as safety in a world that had proven itself unsafe. "I'll do everything I can to keep you safe," he promised. "I know. That's why I'm not afraid anymore." Lisa reached out and placed one small hand on his knee. "Thank you, Thomas Webb, for seeing me when everyone else just saw a target or a prize or a problem, for helping when helping was hard." They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, the medical wing's quiet sounds providing a gentle backdrop. Eventually, a nurse came to check on Lissa's vitals and reminded Thomas that the child needed rest. He said goodbye and promised to see her before they departed. As he made his way back to his quarters, Thomas's comm unit buzzed constantly with messages, colleagues wanting to know if the rumors were true, friends expressing concern about his safety, even a few vendors from the marketplace sending notes of thanks for standing up to the guild's thugs. He ignored most of them, too tired to craft responses. His apartment was exactly as he'd left it that morning, small, functional, impersonal. He'd never bothered to decorate much beyond the basics: a bed, a table, a chair, a small kitchen unit, a view screen for entertainment. The quarters of someone who'd never intended to put down roots, who'd always maintained the psychological freedom to leave if necessary. Thomas packed quickly, selecting practical clothing and basic toiletries. The Pixori had assured him they could provide anything else he might need. As he worked, His mind kept returning to the look in Lissa's eyes, the way she'd said, "You won't let me fall," with such absolute conviction. He'd spent 5 years trying to be unremarkable, trying to do his job competently without drawing attention or making waves. In a single afternoon, that entire approach had been shattered. Now he was remarkable, whether he wanted to be or not. The human who'd stood down Tharn warriors. The guard who'd protected a sacred child. The person who'd earned the gratitude of an entire civilization. It should have felt overwhelming. Instead, it just felt right. Thomas finished packing and sent a message to Commander Yatrell, confirming that he'd be ready to depart with the Pixori delegation in the morning. Then he collapsed onto his bed, exhausted but unable to quiet his thoughts. Tomorrow, he'd leave the Celestial Nexus for the first time in 5 years. He'd travel to a world he'd never heard of, deal with political intrigue he didn't understand, and try to protect a child who meant everything to people he'd just met. 5 years ago, he would have called that insane. Now it felt like exactly what he was supposed to do. He fell asleep to dreams of wings and starlight and enormous violet eyes that saw him, truly saw him, in a way nothing else ever had. The Pixori ship was unlike anything Thomas had seen in his years on the station. Where most vessels prioritized function over form, creating blocky, efficient shapes designed to move cargo or personnel, the Pixori craft looked like it had been grown rather than built. Its hull curved in smooth, organic lines that reminded Thomas of bird bones, lightweight and graceful, but clearly possessing hidden strength. Crystalline panels that might have been viewports or sensor arrays caught the station's lights, scattering them in rainbow patterns across the docking bay. Thomas stood at the airlock with his single duffel bag, watching as the Pixori delegation made their final preparations for departure. They moved with practiced coordination, each member knowing their role without apparent need for verbal communication. It was like watching a flock of birds in flight, individual actions that combined into elegant collective motion. Wing Marshal Kessa approached, her golden wings folded against her back. "Ready, Thomas Webb?" "As ready as I'll be. Though I should warn you, I've never been on a Pixori ship before. If there are protocols or customs I should know about, now would be a good time to mention them." Kessa's expression softened into something that might have been amusement. "Our customs are simple. While in flight, the ship belongs to the sky. We act as one wing of a greater whole. Rank matters less than competence. Trust matters more than protocol." She paused, then added, "And fear not. We have made accommodations for your size. Our ships are designed for flexibility." Thomas followed her through the airlock and into the ship's interior. The corridors were wider than he'd expected, with high ceilings that suggested the Pixori preferred open spaces, even when confined within a vessel. The walls had the same organic quality as the exterior, with subtle texture that felt almost warm to the touch. Lighting came from strips embedded in the ceiling, providing a soft glow that reminded Thomas of dusk. They passed several Pixori along the way, all of whom stopped what they were doing to watch Thomas pass. He saw curiosity in their expressions, but also something else: respect, gratitude. It was hard to read alien body language with certainty, but the way they positioned their wings suggested formal acknowledgement of his presence. Kessa led him to a small cabin near what appeared to be the ship's medical section. "Your quarters. We've adjusted the internal gravity to match your homeworld standard. The bed should accommodate your frame. We had to consult station records for human average dimensions, and the facilities should meet your needs." The cabin was surprisingly comfortable. The bed, while smaller than what Thomas was used to, looked sturdy enough. A desk and chair had been positioned near a viewport, and a small storage unit occupied one wall. Someone had even left a data tablet on the desk, with what looked like information files about Pixori culture and language basics. "This is perfect. Thank you. There is someone who wishes to see you before we depart." Kessa stepped aside, and Lissa entered the cabin, moving carefully to accommodate her bandaged wing. She'd been dressed in clean clothing, a simple tunic and leggings in soft grey, and her violet eyes were bright with excitement. "Thomas, you're really here." "I said I would be." Thomas knelt down so they were at eye level. How's the wing? Still hurts, but less than before. The doctor said I can try short flights in a few days if the healing continues well. Lissa moved closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. Kessa told me about your quarters. They're right next to mine, in case I need anything during the flight. Smart placement, easy to find each other. I wanted to give you something. Lisa reached into a small pouch at her belt and withdrew an object that caught the light. A crystalline structure no larger than Thomas's thumb, shaped like a wing in flight. Colors swirled within it, shifting as Lissa turned it in her hands. This is called a sky shard. When a Pixori comes of age, they make one to represent their first true flight. Mine isn't ready yet because I'm still young, but this one belonged to my mother. Thomas felt his breath catch. Lisa, I can't take something that important. Please. Lisa pressed the crystal into his palm, her small hands wrapping around his fingers. My mother died when I was very small, before the skyborn gift manifested in me. But Kessa says she would have wanted you to have this, because you protected her daughter when she couldn't. The crystal felt warm against Thomas's skin, and the colors within seemed to pulse with a rhythm that reminded him of a heartbeat. Are you sure? Yes. It means you're part of my wing now, part of my sky. Family doesn't have to share blood. It can share trust instead. Thomas closed his fingers around the crystal, feeling the weight of what Lissa was offering. Not just a physical object, but a connection. A place in her life that transcended species and circumstance. Thank you. I'll keep it safe. Lissa smiled, her whole face transforming with the expression. Then she threw her small arms around his neck in an embrace that surprised Thomas with its strength. He hugged her back carefully, mindful of her injured wing, and felt something inside himself shift and settle. Kessa watched from the doorway, her expression unreadable. When Lissa finally released Thomas and scampered off to her own quarters, the wing marshal stepped fully into the cabin. She has given you something precious, more than the crystal itself. She has claimed you as kin. In our culture, that bond is sacred. I understand, and I take it seriously. I know you do. That's why she offered it. Kessa moved to the viewport, gazing out at the station beyond. We will depart within the hour. The journey to our homeworld will take 5 days at maximum flight. During that time, I would like to brief you more thoroughly on our situation. The kidnapping of our Skyborn was not a random act. It was carefully planned, precisely executed, and funded by someone with deep knowledge of our defenses and protocols. You think the traitor is someone high in your command structure. I know they are. The question is who, and whether they acted alone or as part of a larger conspiracy. Kessa turned to face him. Our society is not like most others you've encountered, Thomas Webb. We don't have traditional hierarchies of power. Our social structure revolves around flight. Those who fly together develop bonds that transcend individual ambition. The Skyborn sits at the center of this structure, not as a ruler, but as the living embodiment of what connects us all. So whoever took her was trying to break that connection, or exploit it. With the Skyborn under their control, they could potentially manipulate our entire civilization, force us to make decisions we would never freely choose, turn our greatest strength, our unity, into a weapon against us. Thomas thought about that. But she escaped. That must have thrown their plans into chaos. Indeed. Which means they will be desperate. Desperate enemies make mistakes, but they also take increasingly dangerous risks. Kessa's wings flexed slightly. I am telling you this because you deserve to know what you've agreed to. This investigation will be dangerous. Those responsible have already demonstrated willingness to kill, and your presence as Lissa's protector makes you a target. I can handle myself. Against Tharn mercenaries without weapons or backup. Kessa's tone wasn't mocking. If anything, it sounded concerned. Thomas, your courage is beyond question, but courage alone won't stop a plasma bolt or a poisoned blade. I need you to understand that we cannot guarantee your safety. Nobody can guarantee anyone's safety. We just do our best and hope it's enough. Thomas met her gaze steadily. I'm not doing this because I think it'll be easy or safe. I'm doing it because that kid trusted me when she had no reason to trust anyone, and because leaving her to face this alone feels wrong in a way I can't ignore. Kessa was quiet for a long moment. Then she made a gesture with her wings that Thomas had learned meant deep respect. You are worthy of the honor Lissa has given you. When we arrive at our homeworld, there will be ceremonies, formal acknowledgements of your actions, political elements who will want to use you for their own purposes. I wanted you to have time to prepare yourself. I'm a security guard from a commercial station. I don't know anything about politics or ceremonies. You know how to stand your ground when it matters. That's all the politics you'll need. Kessa moved toward the cabin exit, then paused. Get some rest. Once we're underway, there will be much to discuss. And Thomas? Thank you, not just for protecting our Skyborn, but for seeing past her title to the child beneath it. Too many forget that she is young, still learning, still capable of being hurt. You didn't forget. That matters more than you know. She left before Thomas could respond. He stood alone in his cabin, the sky shard crystal warm in his palm, and wondered what exactly he'd gotten himself into. The ship's departure was smoother than Thomas expected. There was a brief sensation of movement, a subtle shift in the gravity that made his inner ear protest momentarily, and then they were away from the station and accelerating toward the jump point that would take them into Pixori space. Through his viewport, Thomas watched the celestial nexus shrink from massive structure to distant point of light to finally nothing at all, leaving only stars in every direction. He spent the first day of the journey learning the ship's layout and meeting more of the 3rd Aerial Legion. The Pixori were uniformly polite, but clearly curious about him. Many had questions about Earth, about human culture, about what it was like working on the station. Thomas answered as best he could, though he suspected his life seemed rather mundane compared to what they were probably imagining. Fleet Commander Torvin took particular interest in Thomas's security training. The old warrior spent hours explaining Pixori combat philosophy, which emphasized aerial maneuverability and strike-from-above tactics that made little sense for ground-bound species. But you fought from the ground, Torvin pointed out. You used your standing position as strength rather than weakness. Interesting adaptation. I didn't really think about tactics. I just knew I wasn't going to move. The best tactics are the ones you don't have to think about. They arise from who you are, not what you've been taught. Lisa visited his cabin each day, always with some excuse, showing him a new data file about Pixori history, asking about Earth animals, requesting help with language lessons. Thomas suspected she just wanted company, someone who didn't treat her as sacred or special, but simply as herself. They fell into an easy routine. She would perch on his desk while he sat in the chair, and they would talk about everything and nothing. On the 3rd day, she asked him about his family. My parents died when I was young, Thomas said. Mining accident on one of Jupiter's moons. After that, I bounced around between relatives who didn't really want another kid to feed. Joined station security as soon as I was old enough because it offered steady work and a place to belong. Lissa's wings drooped. You've been alone. Not alone, just independent. It's different. Is it? Those violet eyes studied him with uncomfortable perception. Or is that what you tell yourself so it hurts less? Thomas didn't have an answer for that. Instead, he changed the subject by asking about her own family, her life before the kidnapping. Lisa spoke about growing up surrounded by warriors and scholars, about learning to fly almost before she could walk, about the strange experience of suddenly hearing thoughts that weren't her own when the Skyborn gift had manifested. It was scary at first, she admitted. All those voices, all those feelings that weren't mine. Kessa helped me learn to control it, to open and close the connection when I needed to. But sometimes I still hear everything, every Pixori within range, all their thoughts touching mine. It can be overwhelming. Can you hear my thoughts? No. The connection only works with other Pixori. You're quiet, peaceful. I like that. On the fourth day, they crossed into Pixori space, and Thomas got his first view of their homeworld on the ship's main display. The planet was smaller than Earth, with vast oceans and scattered archipelagos rather than major continents. The atmosphere had a faint violet tinge that Kessler explained came from unique particulates in their upper atmosphere, the same compounds that made their skies ideal for their species' flight capabilities. "We call it Sky Home," Kessler said, standing beside Thomas as they watched the planet grow larger on approach. "Every Pixori who leaves knows they will return. Our wings carry us across the stars, but they always remember the sky that first lifted them." As they descended through the atmosphere, Thomas saw cities that seemed to grow directly from the landscape, structures that spiraled upward like organic towers, connected by bridges and walkways that would have terrified anyone with a fear of heights. Pixori filled the air in massive flocks, their wings creating patterns that looked almost like choreographed dance. The ship landed at what Kessler identified as the Wing Marshal's personal facility, a complex of buildings arranged in a circular pattern around a central courtyard, where dozens of Pixori were already gathering. As the airlock opened and Thomas stepped out onto an alien world, for the first time in his life, he was struck by the sound, thousands of wings humming in harmony, creating a frequency that resonated in his chest. Lissa emerged beside him, her injured wing still bandaged, but her other wing spread wide. The assembled Pixori saw her, and the humming intensified, building into something that sounded like music and celebration and relief all mixed together. They launched into the air as one, creating spirals of color around the ship, and Lissa's expression transformed into pure joy. "They're singing welcome," she said softly. "They're singing home." Kessa descended the ramp with her legion behind her, and the aerial celebration shifted into ordered formations, wings of Pixori aligning themselves with military precision. She raised one arm, and the humming ceased immediately, leaving only the natural sound of wind through wings. "People of Sky Home," Kessa's voice rang out, amplified somehow without visible technology. "Our Skyborn has returned, stolen by treachery, pursued by enemies, but brought home by courage that knew no species boundary. I present to you Thomas Webb, the human who stood between our most precious treasure and those who would have destroyed her." Every Pixori in the courtyard turned to look at Thomas. Hundreds of violet eyes, all focused on him with an intensity that made his skin prickle. Then, as one, they lowered themselves toward the ground in what he recognized as a gesture of deep respect. Lissa took his hand, her small fingers wrapping around his. "Don't be afraid," she whispered. "They honor you, all of them." A figure descended from the aerial gathering, an ancient Pixori whose wings had faded to pale silver with age. She landed before Thomas and studied him with eyes that held the weight of years. When she spoke, her voice carried absolute authority. "Thomas Webb, the Skyborn has claimed you as kin. The Third Aerial Legion has vouched for your courage. Do you accept the responsibilities such honors carry?" Thomas looked at Lissa, whose expression was hopeful and trusting. He thought about the past 5 days, the journey he'd taken not just through space, but through his own understanding of what mattered. He thought about standing in a marketplace facing down warriors who could have killed him, making the choice that felt impossible to avoid. "I do," he said clearly. The ancient Pixori's wings spread wide, revealing patterns that seemed to glow with internal light. "Then on behalf of all Pixori, across all our scattered wings, I welcome you to Sky Home. You are Sky Brother to our Skyborn. May your feet find solid ground when you need it, and may your courage never waver." The assembled Pixori erupted into song again, their voices creating harmonies that Thomas felt more than heard. Lissa's hand tightened in his, and when he looked down at her, she was crying, but smiling through the tears. "Thank you," she whispered, "for being here, for seeing me, for not letting me fall." Thomas squeezed her hand gently. "Always," he promised. "That's what family does." And as the Pixori sang their welcome to the sky, as an alien sun set over an alien world, Thomas Webb, unremarkable security guard from a commercial station, human of no particular importance in the vast galaxy, understood that he had finally found the place he was always meant to be. Not a job or a position or a role to fill, but home.